Okay, so today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the interactive notebook. In this case, this particular notebook is being used for a class in effective classroom instruction for English language learners. But the idea is to give you an example of a notebook that you could use as an interactive notebook in your class. The first thing about the interactive notebook is it's meant to be a personal tool for the student. And so, right away you want to have them personalize their notebook with something about themselves. We had a little activity at the beginning of the class where we drew a representation of ourselves in an activity that we like to do, and so we could take and recreate that in the beginning of our notebook. On this side, on the very front cover of the notebook, is information that is important to your class. In our case, it's a representation of the levels of successively higher order thinking. Costa's levels of 3 levels of higher order of thinking, with the higher order thinking being in the ceiling with the skylight. But we put that there because it's pretty significant when you're trying to, it's sort of symbolic with English language learners that you want to have them still thinking at a higher level, even though their English isn't at the same level yet. It's going to be. Okay, so at the very beginning of your interactive notebook, you'll want to have a table of contents. And initially, of course, these would be blank. But as you fill in your notebook, then you can fill in the location of where the topics are and what page they're on. I made 2 columns because I had, quite a lot of information, and I think 2 columns at a minimum is what you might need. And you may need several pages of table of contents, so it's good to leave the next page blank. In my case, I didn't need more than that, so I put a rubric on the next page. At the very beginning of your notebook, it's useful to put things that you may want to address frequently. Another thing that's at the beginning of this notebook is the table roles, and you've got a matrix here with the dates on the left-hand side and the different roles of the partners in the base group across the top. The manager, the scribe, the reporter, and the supplies runner. The supplies scout, I guess, is what we called it. And so you would list which team member is under which role that week, and then every week it would shift around, according to some pattern. So that's something that would be handy to have at the beginning of your notebook, so that kids have easy access to it. Another thing that you might have a list of at a section of in your notebook is strategies. So for us, as we collected various strategies to use in the classroom, we made a record of them and little notes to remind us of what they were and where to find more information about them. Another very key part of the notebook is vocabulary. So you could leave several pages open for vocabulary instruction, and then page after page, then you'll have all of the vocabulary as you go through it during the year in one place. I made an example of how you might do math vocabulary, which would be different than just one line with the word and a definition. In math, you want to, there's lots to mathematics vocabulary. And this technique could be used in science or in English. But the idea here is that you have a verbal and visual word association. And so for every vocabulary word, you'd have a quadrant where you have in the first quadrant the word itself, and then a visual or graphic representation of it, and an example, and then an example of it, and then a symbolic representation of the word. And so for vocabulary in a math class, then you set aside quadrants in your notebook to fill in. And you might, in the beginning, when you preview a word, just put the word itself and then later fill in different quadrants. And you could have a table of contents for the vocabulary as well. Going back into the regular notebook. In our example, and you can set up your interactive notebook in a variety of ways, but in this example, the idea was to have this right-hand side of the page to be used for note-taking during class and highlighting those notes. And you kind of cordon off a section of that for the specific notes from the lecture. And then beneath this squiggly line, there's a summary, and then you can summarize those notes at the end of the day. And then on the left-hand side, you have in the margin, you have space for questions. And in particular, we were decided we would have 3 levels of questions. A question 1 at the first level, Costa's first level, and question 2 and question 3 at the highest level, Costa's highest level of thinking, higher order thinking. On the left-hand side of the page is a place where you could attach foldables, and this one, and you can attach them in a variety of ways. This one had printing on the back, so I wanted to attach it so that you could read every side of the foldable. And then you can also have space to write a reflection or some, reflection on the material here. And this reflection could be a response to the 3 questions that you've created for yourself in the margins, or it could be an elaboration on some topic, or it could be additional notes from the text. There's a variety of things you can put on the left-hand side. The idea, though, is that on this left-hand side here, you are adding to the information that you got during the class. You're interacting with that information and elaborating on it. On this page, I actually added a graphic to the notes that were given during the class because I didn't have time to write them during the class, but just made a note for myself, and then I filled in this graphic later. So you don't just have to do your interacting on this side of the notebook page. Let's see. As I was mentioning before, on this margin you can write the 3 levels of questions that represent different orders, lower, middle, and higher order thinking from Costa's higher order thinking. In fact, over here in the strategies section of our talk, these levels of higher order thinking are very important. So I have a fold out on the vocabulary of Costa's levels of thinking, and then another fold out which gives you examples of how you would ask questions in an English class at the 3 levels. For example, at level 1 it's point to the, or list the, it's just getting information right away. And then at level 2 is what would happen to you if